Welcome, dear viewers, to the topic on when fasting and fed bioequivalence study is required. We know that bioequivalence studies are required to be performed, and these are required to demonstrate that the generic formulation provide the similar or comparable therapeutic effect and pharmacokinetics compared to the reference formulation. Sometimes the bioequivalence study is performed in fasting state. Sometimes it is required to be performed in the fed state, but sometimes it is required to be performed in both the fasting and fed state to demonstrate the therapeutic similarity. In generic drug development, sometimes both the fasted and fed bioequivalence studies are required. These studies demonstrate that the generic product performed similarly or comparatively to the reference listed drug RLD under different physiological conditions. As we know that the presence of food in the GI affect the pharmacokinetics of the drug. So to show the similarity, comparability to the reference formulation, the bioequivalence studies are required to be performed in both fasted and fed state. This happens sometimes for some of the formulations. So when it is required to perform in both fasted and fed state, that we will see. So fasted bioequivalence study is always required. So is it a right sentence or is it a right concept that fasted bioequivalence study is always required? So the answer is no. Always only fasted bioequivalence study is not required. Sometimes only fed study can also be required or can also be done. It depends on how the reference formulation states the administration. If the reference formulation label gives clear understanding and idea and instruction that take this formulation after food, then only fed state can be required. But many of the times, if the formulation or RLD is required to be taken after food, then fasted and fed both are required. So it depends on to the product specific guidelines provided by the organizations, regulatory agencies, and the product specific guidances provided by the country specific regulatory agencies. Fasting bioequivalence is required for all the immediate release oral formulations, and fasted state studies are conducted under fasting conditions, and typically the overnight fasting is there, typically more than 10 hours. Food restriction will be there, and then the product will be administered. The purpose of this fasted study or fasting state study is to establish the baseline performance of the generic product when the GI tract is empty. Fed bioequivalence study is required as per the product specific guidances and also as per the labeling of the RLD. If the RLD label specifies administration with food, then the fed state studies are required. If the RLD label says take with food or food affects the pharmacokinetics significantly, a fed B study becomes necessary and it will be required. RLD-B studies were conducted in fed state. If the original RLD approval included fed studies, generic must match the same conditions. So it is as per the reference formulation instructions and as per the product specific guidelines. Formulation is VCS class 2 or 4. So as we know, VCS class 2 and 4 formulations belong to the class of drugs which are having poor solubility or low solubility. So low solubility drugs can show significant variability with food, and thus fed studies are required and these are mandatory. For BCS class 2 and 4 drugs formulations, generally fasting and fed both studies are required. Modified release formulations require both studies. So most extended release or delayed release products require both fasted and fed B studies due to the potential food effect. High fat meal requirement. FDA requires high fat, high calorie meal in fed B studies, and for your easy understanding, you can remember that high fat, high calorie meal means it should provide 800 to 1000 kilocalorie so that the food effect can be potential and it will be maximum. Sometimes high fat meal can increase the absorption. That time low fat meal can also be instructed. Regulatory references are there or guidelines are there for the fasted B and fed B. FDA bioequivalence guidance for industry and product specific recommendations are there which provide B requirements for each RLD. ICH guidelines, EMA guidelines are also there which provides the information and requirements. So as per the product type, fasted and fed B study will be required. If the immediate release formulation contains BCS class 1 or BCS class 3 and is a immediate release type of formulation, then only fasted B study will be required. Extended release formulation will require both fasted and fed B. BCS class 2 drugs will require fasted and fed studies. Both BCS class 4 drugs will require both fasted B and fed B. If formulation is ODT tablet, for example, so fasted will be required and fed will depend on to the RLD labeling. Similarly, you can consider the oral suspensions containing the insoluble drug, or you can consider the simple solution also. So fasted B will be waived if the product is BCS1, but fasted and fed both will be required if the liquid formulation contains BCS class 2 or 4 molecule or BCS class 2 or 4 drug. Then for solutions, fed B study will be waived, and also it depends on to the RLD information and recommendation for the administration. This was a information on fasting and fed B study requirement. The conditions when fasting and fed both B studies are required to be demonstrated. I hope you might have got good idea for the topic, and whenever you are working onto the formulations, you should know how the fasting and fed study is selected or what are the criteria to go for only fasting, only fed, or both fasting and fed. If you have any queries, questions, you can mail me, you can comment, and I will be happy to answer your queries regarding the bioequivalence studies for the generic formulations. Thank you for watching the video, and please do like, share and subscribe to this channel.